Heard on Thursdays with Nikki is about to go live online. Catch HOT, the iconic radio show that made Philippine FM radio talk, every Thursday on the Monster.
Streaming video on the Monster Facebook page at RX931, the Monster YouTube channel at RX931, and twitch.tv/Monster RX931.
You heard on Thursday's host, Nikki Porter. Stand by and enjoy the program.
Hey Monsters, good evening. My name is Nikki Porter, and it's time for another hot conversation on Heard on Thursdays, the show that made Philippine FM radio talk only on season's hottest, Monster RX93.1. Now that we seem to be, fingers crossed, at the tail end of the COVID-19 pandemic, there seems to be a pre-existing pandemic we're all living in, whether we're aware of it or not. Now, if you've been dating or have been in relationships, some of which don't even have to be romantic, you might have experienced a taste of it. It's called the a-hole pandemic. Now, whether you're cuffed, uncuffed, or somewhere in between, because 'tis the season after all, one thing you might have encountered at least once in your life is a toxic relationship. Now, it's a kind of relationship where you can lose sight of yourself and put all the focus on your partner, or the kind where you never seem to find common ground in an argument and you just sweep it under the rug and keep hurting each other, or the kind where your needs are gaslighted but your partner makes you feel like they can't live without you still. Sometimes you can actually be the toxic one and you might not be aware of it too. But the first step of building healthy relationships is by knowing your own patterns, and that also includes the type of people you're attracted to, the type of people that you date. And so tonight, I have the pleasure of speaking to an inspiring individual by the name of Angelika Koch. She is a master certified life coach, certified relationship coach, certified mediation instructor, and of course, the author of the book, The A-Hole Pandemic. Yes, it's actually a term. The A-Hole Pandemic, a field guide to IDing, deleting, and healing from toxic relationships. So hopefully you monsters tuned in on radio via Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch will learn a thing or two this evening and be inspired to start building better connections and relationships. So monsters, ladies and gents, tonight, please welcome to Heard on Thursdays, Angelika Koch. Hi!
Hi! How are you doing?
Oh my gosh, welcome to the show, Angelika. I'm so very excited to speak with you this evening. Not because, of toxic relationships, but because, I've been following you for some time. And so this is very, just for lack of a better term, it's exciting, period, right? Well, the first question that I usually like to ask my guests is in relation to the pandemic, but not the pandemic that you're talking about in your book, rather COVID-19. So how did you process the past 2 years, and what did you do to cope, to keep yourself sane? Did you develop new hobbies like everybody else did?
So, okay, the pandemic for me was really scary, absolutely scary, because I was constantly on edge, hoping that, my different family members, wear your mask, go out,
Right.
Be safe, keep your distance. And so I had that kind of anxiety. But I think I'm very fortunate in the way of actually isolation wasn't that bad for me, just because I'm an introvert. So I spent my days reading books. I spent my days, posting on TikTok and Instagram and working on my next book that I was going to publish, what I ended up doing, and just really diving into my work and into my passions. So for me, it was one of those nice excuses. You don't have to make up an excuse why you can't hang out with someone. It's like, oh no, I can't hang out with you because Rona, sorry. One of those moments. But there was a lot of anxiety that I had to deal with. Learn to ground myself a little bit better, learn that I have to take things one day at a time. That even though I wanted to, I had this thing where I was like, I have to control whether or not, like my parents in particular, go out. I'm like, please don't go out. You're not going out, right? I wasn't around them. I was in Connecticut and they were in Tennessee. So I had to learn to release that fear and to release the need to control others because you can't control others. But I wanted to. I wanted to.
Protection.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm very protective.
Well, is it safe to assume, I'm not sure, but is it safe to assume that you began writing your book during the pandemic, hence the name? Or what prompted you to write it whenever you did?
I actually started writing it before the pandemic, and it was called the A-hole epidemic. But then the pandemic hit, so it was like, we're switching it to pandemic.
Yeah.
And so released with the new name of pandemic instead of epidemic.
Gotcha. Well, was there like a eureka moment or like a tipping point of sorts that actually led you to like, you know what, I got to write a book about this?
So it's been something that's been on my mind for a while. When I was younger, I didn't know if healthy relationship existed. Outside of my parents, I knew they had a healthy relationship, but I'm like, does it exist in my life, in my world? Because I kept attracting toxic or really abusive relationships. And it wasn't until I started doing work on myself that I was able to stop attracting those kind of relationships, start putting down boundaries, start knowing when to walk away, learning what healthy looks like. And I'm like, oh my God, we need a book like that just cuts out all the fluff. I feel like a lot of books, they everything that they write, it's amazing. Don't get me wrong. But I feel like some books, they have like a chapter that could be summed up into a paragraph. And I didn't want to write a book like that. So I just packed everything I knew into a single book. I didn't want to stretch it out. I made it into a workbook/book so that people can work through their own stuff and start finding healthier partners.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense because we are just out here, swiping left and right or trying to meet people organically, but not really knowing what's really beneath the surface of that person. And, if what we are getting ourselves into is healthy or not, because sometimes, like you said, sometimes we've never really known what a healthy relationship looks like. So if you could pitch to somebody in their 20s or their 30s or even their 40s to read your book, how would you explain to them what it's about?
This is a book that helps you to identify what toxic looks like, whether it be toxic within yourself, which we all have toxic habits we got to work through, or toxic within other people. This allows you to work through to figure out what is it that you're looking for in a partner. What does healthy communication look like? What does healthy versus toxic look like? So this is the kind of book that you're not just going to read all the way through. You're actually going to work on yourself while reading the book.
It's like, I think I read somewhere that's like kind of like a workbook that lets you really dive into yourself, I guess, right?
Yes. This book is a workbook where the first section's like a book, right? You're just reading through the pages. But then I slowly start like creeping in like these little sections that you have to fill out. If you're reading the ebook, you need to have a journal or something that you can write out the answers. But if you buy the actual physical book, then you just fill out your answers in the book. And then the further you go into the book, the more work you're putting in, because now you've already learned the information that you need. So let's start working through what you've just learned.
I love that. That's so cool. I mean, and I think to make it more interactive and not just reading it, I think that would be really helpful to really ingrain it in people's minds and try to start learning and healing, right? So, like I mentioned, I was able to browse through the first few pages, and in it includes 7 somewhat archetypes of toxic people one would hope to never meet, but likely will. So in your own life, did you actually meet these 7 personalities, or were they inspired also by other people's stories apart from your own?
A mixture of both. I've met all 7, and I'm like, oh, sweet Lord, when you meet some of these people, like the narcissist and people that are just highly toxic versus, I have like the insecure bear that's not as toxic, but it can still impact you. And I think all of us can relate to the, toxic person of the insecure bear, because I think all of us have a little bit of that within us, a little bit of insecurity, a little bit of fear because of the things that we've been through. So some of these you're going to read and you're going to be like, I've met someone like that. While others, you'll be like, I've met someone like that. Oh, I'm kind of like that too. And it's going to hit you where you're like, ooh, I got to work on that, make this a little healthier.
Yeah, for sure. And to identify these people, and probably there are other types of toxic people too, but to identify those seven, I think it's a good start for us to be like, oh, that person was toxic after all. And to just really, in hindsight, like, it's a good thing you're no longer with them. God willing that you're no longer with them as well. So, in relation to the title of your book, do you also believe, because there are these a-holes, do you believe that there's also a pandemic of sorts of toxic relationships going on in the world?
I think there's a lot of toxic relationships going on in the world, and a lot of people that aren't willing to work on themselves, because that self-work, God, that's painful. That's painful to go through, to have to self-reflect and be like, oh my God, who am I? And you have these moments where you realize that you don't really like the person that you've become. And it's not, it's not your fault that you have all these wounds on you. A lot of toxicity stems from wounds, right? And I'm not talking about abusers, though, technically we could say that. I'm talking about just people who have toxic habits. It's learned behaviors, it's wounds that they've carried, things that they haven't healed from. And in order to heal from them, you have to face those wounds. And that can be a really hard and painful experience to go through. So there are certain people that are in, I always call it the first level of toxicity. They'll point to everyone else and claim everyone else is toxic. Meanwhile, they're hurting everyone else from the wounds that they have with them, from the learned behaviors, and they don't want to acknowledge that. Those aren't typically people that won't change. They don't want to change. They're scared to look at themselves. And then you have the next level of toxic, of people that recognize they're toxic, and they're like pointing their fingers, and then they're like, wait, no, I'm a monster. This is not good. And it's not saying that you're a monster, but I've heard people actually call themselves that. But then they don't want, it's just too painful. It hurts too much. They don't want to do it. So they end up, they tend to just, they feel sorry for themselves, which is okay, because they have been through a lot, but they also don't want to work on healing those wounds because it is so painful. And you have the third layer of toxic, where the level of toxic where they have the wounds and it's so painful, but they're like, I don't want to be this person anymore. I don't want to hurt others because I'm hurting. I want to work on myself. I want to heal. I want to be better. I want to change these habits that I've learned, these survival habits. So they start to work on themselves, but they're still going to be kind of toxic. Those are the people that, I'm always like, this can be healthy. This can be a healthy relationship because they're working on themselves. We're all mostly at level 3 or level 4. Level 4 is you've put in years worth of work, and you're able to have a healthy relationship. You're able to handle conflict in a healthy way. Yes, you have struggles. We all have struggles. But you've worked through a lot of those struggles. And no, you're not perfect, but you're at least trying to be the best version of yourself.
Yeah, and I really hope, like, this is the one thing that I've also been realizing as of late. It's like a lot of people really aren't, sometimes they're just not aware of, like, how much hurt they are giving to other people, or like how toxic they are. Sometimes maybe they even know they are, but they don't want to do the work, or they're just like, it's just the way I've always been, which is actually, very negative and very, what do you call this? It's a very, negative way of just like thinking about themselves, like they can't grow. Now, for the monsters who are tuned in, by the way, I'm speaking to Angelika Koch. She is the author of The A-Hole Pandemic. Hopefully it's the last time I'll say it in this first half of the show, too. But she's also a master certified life coach and a certified relationship coach. Now, Angelika, in your own life, though, could you share with us what was probably one of the most toxic relationships that you've had, and how did you find your way out of it?
The most toxic relationship I had, I'm going to try to keep this as PG as possible.
I think that's one of, in case you dial it down a little bit.
Well, it unfortunately was an extremely abusive relationship that I was in. It was the first relationship I ever got in. And this person did, think of the worst things possible, they did that and more. So we'll just keep it like that. Just because we're on radio, I don't want to trigger anyone. But that was the worst one. And that really just destroyed me. It absolutely destroyed me for many years. Whenever I first got into the relationship, I was more of a secure attachment style. But after that relationship, for years, I was highly avoidant. I kept everyone at an arm's length. I couldn't get close to anyone. I couldn't even feel love because of how just annihilated this relationship made me. Like, I can't even say enough, like how I was destroyed. But I worked through that. And because I was still in the healing process, I attracted more toxic people. And then I found my way into becoming healthier and healing and growth. And that's when I started to attract the healthier people.
So when did that breakthrough happen then? Like when you realize, okay, it's one thing for me to carry the baggage into new relationships and these people that I am attracting at the moment, but to heal from it and lighten the burden, I got to do some inner work. So when did that happen for you? What was your turning point?
I was 24 and oh my gosh, I have to word this so carefully. I remember I was on the bathroom floor and I was crying my eyes out, and I realized I have two choices. I either don't move forward anymore with my life, or I work on healing, because I can't do this anymore. I can't feel this way anymore. I can't live like this anymore. I can't. And so that was my turning point. I ended up deciding the other direction, and I went to Barnes and Noble, and I remember I just started grabbing every self-help book I could off the shelf on healing and abuse and everything I could. And I remember just walking over to the counter and just buying all of them. And one by one, I just read these different books on healing, on self-work. I was watching podcasts, not watching podcasts. I was listening to podcasts. I was watching videos on YouTube. I was everything I could. I just started just packing it in and dedicating my life to healing and work. And it was awful. It's so painful to go through that, because you start to realize everything. You start to realize yourself. I realized I hated who I had become, and I didn't want to be that person anymore. So I wrote out who I wanted to be, and I kept trying to work towards that woman that I wanted to be. And I've become that woman now. But it took me years. It's not an easy process. It's like an uphill battle that you're just marching up there one day at a time.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. But I mean, the fact that you really did, commit to healing, that's something that a lot of us would really like to learn how to do also. I mean, probably depending on however long it's going to last too, and the fact that it is painful, that's something that you don't want to stick to like in the long term. But if it's really to better yourself and really to work towards the person that you want to be, well worth it. Yes, you're here now and you are like making a difference, especially with your book and also with your social media and the content that you share. So like when you were in that healing process though, was it difficult to find, like, to move on from like the patterns that you had? Like, when you were looking for someone to date, let's say, were you proactive in trying to figure out, like, to weed out the bad apples? Okay, it's like, no, you remind me of this person, no, to avoid getting hurt again.
At first it was hard because the familiar feels safe, right? So I would attract a really toxic person, somewhat abusive. For some reason, I was just a magnet for abusers. So I would be like, oh, you feel safe and familiar? No, they're abusers. And I would start to realize they were doing the same thing that all the other people had been doing. And I was like, okay, that can't be right. Is that normal? Like, does that, like, it's one of those things where I was like trying to think to myself, like, what is even normal? But I would drop them, and I started dropping other people right and left. And then I realized, if it doesn't feel healthy for me, then it's not healthy. But if it's uncomfortable, then it is. So the problem that a lot of people have, that, any listener that's listening right now, if you're struggling with this, like, I get it. But when you go from attracting abuser after abuser, or toxic relationship after toxic relationship, which those are different, just to be clear. If you have this habit of attracting these kind of people, and then you find someone healthy, you are going to be so uncomfortable. It's not going to feel right. It's not going to feel good. It's going to be like, when's the other shoe going to drop? There's so much anxiety involved. And me being the little toxic person I was back then, bless her heart, I still remember The first healthy relationship that I had gotten into was actually a casual relationship. And she was an absolute sweetheart to me. And I was just, oh God, I feel awful for just, I was trying so hard to be healthy, but I was terrible at it. I was so bad at it. But I learned, she was a therapist, so she kind of helped teach me a lot of different things. Like, no, that's not how we do that. But I learned, I was willing to learn. I was willing to work on myself, but Lord have mercy. It was like a slow train wreck of me trying to be healthy back then.
Yeah, it's not really like riding a bicycle anymore, especially if it's something you want to move on from. Because yeah, like we said, like if it's familiar, it's probably a bad thing if you have a history of like dealing or getting yourself into toxic relationships. Now, the word toxic though, like that's been tossed around for years now to describe people, relationships, even the workplace. But in terms of relationships and people, how do you define toxic behavior? How do you identify toxic behaviors on other people and also within yourself?
So I think it's important to note that there's a difference between toxic behavior, toxic learned behavior, and toxic people. When I think about toxic people, I'm thinking more about abusers, people that they're not going to change, right? They're just going to keep causing harm. But toxic learned behavior, whenever it shows up within ourselves, those are just things that we've learned from our past, from our childhood, from our previous relationships, whether that be manipulation, whether that be gaslighting, whether that be poor communication, constantly saying you, whenever it comes to trying to communicate instead of I feel when this happens. Maybe even learned behavior of that if it is healthy, then it's unsafe. So what ends up happening is when you get into a healthy relationship, you might start sabotaging. You might spice it up a bit with some arguments, find something that you don't like and being like, that I'm going to start an argument with, just to be able to have that high and low that you're so used to, because we're creatures of habit. We're creatures. The habit is comfort to us, and comfort is safe, even if it's not, right? So when it comes to, oh my gosh, I have ADHD. So the original question, completely forgot. I just went on a whole tangent.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Well, it's really like I asked, like, how do you identify toxic behaviors in other people and within yourself? Yeah.
Identifying toxic behaviors. Okay, I'm gonna
You can do it.
see just how neurodivergent I am through the show.
You're fine. You're fine.
So identifying toxic behaviors, what you want to do whenever you get into a relationship, you want to see if they're willing to work on themselves. So let's just say there's a toxic behavior that caused you harm where you're like, wow, I was just gaslit. Now, gaslighting is not always in an abusive relationship. A lot of people gaslight and they don't even realize it. And it's just a difference of perspective sometimes. Like, for example, let's just say you remember one thing one way and they remember it a completely different way. They're like, no, that's not how it happened. Well, that's gaslighting. They're invalidating your experience. So if you were to talk to that person, you're like, hey, I feel like you just invalidated my experience. I feel like my experience was invalidated when this happened. And it really caused me to feel defensive. It caused me to build up a wall. It triggered me. And then they respond with, oh, I'm really sorry. I didn't realize that I was doing that. And then they start to work on that. And maybe they invalidate your experience a couple more times, but you do see a progress of them trying to work where they catch themselves. They're like, I mean, okay, no, not this. I understand this is your experience. And so you see that struggles start to happen. You want to see the struggle where they're working on themselves. Think of it like working out. When you first start working out, you're not going to have the giant weights. You have to build up to that. And there's going to be some days where you have to use lighter weights, some days that you're going to have to use heavier weights. So it's like, it's like the stock market, looking at one of those charts where it's like climbing up a mountain. There's not going to be up and up and up. It's going to be ups and downs, but you're still going to see progress from the time they started. If the person makes it out to be your fault, you're the problem, I don't need to change, that's an issue, because that's someone that's going to continue to cause this harm over and over and over again. So I want you to imagine it like emotional wounds being left on you, one after the other, and you're saying, please stop leaving these wounds,
Mhm.
blaming you for hurting from the wounds they caused.
Yeah, which is like something. I mean, at the same time, like even if they pile these on you too, it's like part of you because you know it because it's so familiar. You want to stay and still want to try and work it out. Depends on the kind of person you are, but at least like someone like me or someone, or the other people who I know who actually have these kinds of experiences as well, they are willing to stay and try and work it out, but the other partner just doesn't realize how much harm it is that they're causing and how much they could change for the better, but just don't want to. And it's it's unfortunate and it's really painful for sure. Now, you could have pursued like any other career, right? After you having your healing process and realizing this is the kind of woman that you want to be. You could have pursued any other career, but why did you want to pursue a career in becoming a certified life and relationship coach, certified mediation instructor?
So it's meditation.
Meditation. I knew
I didn't
that.
want to correct you. I'm so sorry.
My
It's all
meditation.
good. I may have misspelled it. I'm also dyslexic, so I may have actually misspelled it.
I was following your bio, and so I was like, mediation. All right.
All good. It's like I said, I may have like flipped some letters around. I do that all the time. Um,
Now that's clear. That's fine. Meditation.
meditation instructor. Yes. So with the meditation, I genuinely wanted to embrace this healthy practice because there's so many benefits to meditation, right? It can lower anxiety, it can lower depression, it can help increase creativity, increase memory retention. There's like a lot of health benefits to meditation. So I really wanted to just learn more about it. And, if I had someone that really was interested in that, then I could teach them if needed, as a meditation instructor. So that's why I got that certification in mindfulness meditation. But with regards to life coaching and relationship coaching, it's for some reason, it just was something that was put on my heart. Whenever I was at rock bottom and I did not have my life together, I really didn't. That's when I decided that's what I'm going to learn to do. I wanted to be the best version of myself. And that person, that woman that I wanted to become, she was a life coach. She was a relationship coach. She had her stuff together. And I definitely had an idealized version of myself in my mind. Like, I feel like I have my life together a lot more than I did. But I mean, do we ever really have our life fully together? But in the end, it was just that, when you have that whisper in your heart where it's like, do it. You need to do this. You need to, and you just hear it over and over and over again. That's what I had. And I couldn't make it shut up. So I just did it.
I love it. Well, at least now it's like you are living the person that you were manifesting all those years ago, and that you are helping people now, helping people like myself too, just through your content on Instagram. So, but for now though, like actually talking to you, that is actually pretty awesome. And so I'm just gonna try and keep asking the questions that I need answers from. No, I'm just kidding. I'll just
Feel free. I'll answer. You might not get this perfect response, but I'll answer it the best I can.
No problem. I mean, I love that though. And I love how it's very easy for you to like just give such good advice, even in your content actually. Like with you holding the mug of tea, like and then you just like talking to the camera and everything. It's just so casual. And sometimes it's very like sort of like the best friend that's like, you know what? This is what you should do, kind of thing, kind of conversation that you have. It's just like like I find myself sometimes when I see your videos, I'm like, you know what, you're right. It's like I'm having tea with you too. So it's pretty intense. And so it's pretty cool that we were able to actually have you on the show. But a little technical difficulties on the webcam right now. But as long as you can hear me, totally fine. For now, though, can you still hear me, Angelica?
Oh, I can hear you loud and clear. Your
Perfect.
expression was very pleasant. So you're at least on a good expression. I'm just saying.
All right. We'll leave it there then. No, I'm just kidding. But hopefully it's going to move sometime soon. But do you think, though, so now that you are a master certified life coach, relationship coach, also meditation instructor, um, do you think there are toxic behaviors based on your experience and your profession also that have been normalized?
Oh, that's a good question. But, oh, did you? I think we lost her, guys. Well, I mean, since I'm still alive, I'll just answer the question. Okay, so toxic behavior that's been normalized. I think a lot of times we normalize behaviors like jealousy. We normalize behaviors that poor communication skills. Just in general, like it's okay to place blame on the other person in an unhealthy way. And I think that is one of those things that are, that's one of those things that, sorry.
It's all good. That's all good.
That's one of those things that are normalized oftentimes. So we need to start teaching people how to communicate, not telling them just like, oh, it's okay to, place blame where it's due. And don't get me wrong, like toxic behaviors, there are some things that do need to be called out. Like this is not okay for this to happen, but there's a certain way you can do it that'll allow the person to have less of a likelihood to build up a wall, right? So if you're like, you need to stop doing this, that, that's not really gonna help the wall to stay lower. That can end up building up the wall. So we have to teach people how to communicate. I felt really hurt. I felt disrespected when this was said to me. Wording it like that is going to, be more likely to create an impact in the person than to say, you disrespected me when you said this. So now they're building up that wall. They're getting defensive. Now you guys are arguing. You guys aren't actually talking through things. It is you against the person, not you both working towards a solution for the problem. And I think that is, one of those things that we do as coaches or therapists or whatever you're doing, even just people who give out advice should teach people who don't know what healthy communication looks like and to teach them what it looks like so that they can learn how to properly communicate to their partner in a way that is not finger pointing, that it's not going to create more controversy in the relationship and turn each other against each other.
Yeah. And well, I do have a question, follow up to that then, because I do know that I think isn't it like a Gottman kind of method about like I felt like disrespected when you did this or said this, but let's say you phrase it in that sense. What if your person that you're talking to still doesn't seem to be on the same level as you? Like just instead of making you feel heard, they're saying, well, this is the reason why I did that, but not really acknowledging the hurt that they've caused. Like, how do we try and mediate that then?
So pretty much putting water on gaslighting. So whenever that happens, let's just say someone's like, well, that's not my experience. I understand that that's not your experience. I understand this is how you feel, but that doesn't take away from how I feel and how this is impacting me. So you want to bring it back to you and how it's impacting you. And if they're like, well, you're just being sensitive. I don't feel as though I'm being sensitive. This is something that's truly affecting me, and it will continue to affect me if it continues to happen. And if they're like, well, you need to work on that. You need to work on yourself on that. Emotions are an effect of a cause. If the action didn't happen, the emotion wouldn't result from the action. To me, in my perspective, this is not an internal wound that stemmed from my childhood or stemmed from the past before you. This is something that is affecting me right now from an action that is being done to me. So you want to constantly validate yourself and stay firm in how you feel, while also not diminishing them and their feelings. So I understand that's how you feel, doesn't take away how I feel.
Gotcha.
You can keep your feelings. That's cool. But I got mine too, you know?
Gotcha. Yeah. And so how do we, okay, so it's going to be the same thing also that we have to, and how we approach it and like keeping to keep validating ourselves, especially if they say something like, you're asking for too much. Is it something like we have to, are we really asking for too much though? Is there a point where, I mean, like, there's always that question when it comes to dating, right? And like there's always one person, not always, but there's always that person who might tell the other, you're asking for too much. Most of the time, is it too much, or are you just really asking the wrong person?
Usually it's asking the wrong person. Normally it is. And when they say you're asking for too much, it's because they don't want to do it. They don't, it's as simple as that. They don't want to do it. There are some times where the person is asking for a lot. And what I mean by that is, let's just say this person, person A is a workaholic, or they're trying to pay their bills, and because of that, they have to work 2 or 3 jobs, right? And they are just working themselves to death. They can't cut back on that job. They can't do that. They're giving their all. When they come home, they're absolutely exhausted. And their partner wants them to come home and cook and clean and do the dishes and, you know, take care of them on top of these 3 jobs, and also spoil them and spend all their money and do all these things, like let them max out their partner's credit card. Well, I mean, yeah, that's not fair. That's using the other person. That is asking for too much, because at that point, you're not asking for a healthy relationship. You're asking to use another person for your own benefit, no matter how it impacts that other person. But if you're like, hey, I need you to be more present with me, whenever the phone is taken out and I feel as though I'm not being listened to, it really hurts me. That's not asking for too much. If you're saying, physical touch, words of affirmation, acts of service, that's my love language. That's something I need more of in my life, in order to feel, really truly loved in this relationship and supported. That's not asking for too much. Granted, meeting someone else's needs in a relationship that is not a love language of yours, that's a habit that needs to be formed. It's not going to feel natural because that's not your natural love language, but you still need to show that person in both your love language and the other person's love language. So if someone's telling you that you're asking for too much, when you're asking for the bare minimum, or you're just asking for basic relationship healthy 101 needs to be met, that's not asking for too much, but that is showing you where that person stands and their unwillingness to work on themselves. So they're showing you their colors.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure those who are listening on the radio, they're like listening and they're just like banging on the steering wheel and like, I knew it. I knew it. It's just the bare minimum. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who can relate to this conversation for sure. And for people who felt like their needs were minimized or devalued as well. So for sure, I hope this has helped you. They just don't want to do it, like plain and simple, like what Angelika said. So for now, though, there are like you said, it's like it's not necessarily the hurt is stemming from like childhood, but there are past experiences that can bring about toxic behavior in someone. Some might think it's because of a past relationship because it was the most recent, but how far back? Just so that monsters will be aware as well. How far back can these roots actually go?
Childhood. Way back in there, way back to childhood. Some of these learned behaviors, it's because you grow up with toxic parents or abusive parents and you learn this is what love looks like. And maybe you also learn the only way I can survive is through manipulation. The only way I can be heard is if I'm screaming at you. And that's the only time you'll actually listen to my needs and the things that matter to me. So they take that into adulthood and they, in their relationship, when they don't feel heard, they start screaming. And they might not even be an abuser, but their inner child is literally being like, you're not listening to me. I have to scream to make you listen. So, it's important to go see a therapist in that case. Coaches don't, tackle childhood trauma, but go see a therapist and really work through those childhood traumas to help heal that inner child. That's really, really important to do, because when you are going all the way back there to what happened to you when you were 2 years old, 3 years old, that can really impact you for the rest of your life if you don't heal those wounds.
Yeah, for sure. And like again, some of us aren't really aware, and those breakthroughs can only, I guess, happen in therapy. I've had like one breakthrough in therapy one time, and so that's why I am in full support of therapy. Like it made me bawl my eyes out. It was just like, oh my God, I did not know. Like it was right there all along. So go to therapy, guys, if you want to.
Therapy is amazing. I'm a huge fan of therapy. I think everyone should be in therapy. And if you're listening and you're like, I don't need therapy, there's nothing wrong with me. Well, there's nothing wrong with anyone. We just have to heal the wounds that other people have caused us. And therapy can help you, learn so much about yourself, learn what you should and should not tolerate, also learn self-love. There's so many positive things that can come out of therapy.
Yeah, definitely. And so for the monsters who are tuned in, I hope you guys are learning a thing or two. I am glitching once again my webcam. So Angelika, I'm going to go and ask you the next question.
That's
before they take off my my webcam once again. But in terms of narcissistic behaviors, how does it manifest in dating, and what are the
I'm going to take things from there. All good. So narcissistic behavior, whenever it comes to looking at narcissistic behavior, it's important to remember that most people have narcissistic traits, right? It's just toxic traits, right? That can technically be on, if you're looking up like the traits of a narcissist, you'll probably fit a couple of those. And we can, of course, when you see that, then you can work on those to better them. But an actual narcissist, number one, needs to be diagnosed by a psychologist. But also a narcissist, you're going to notice things are going in a cycle, right? They start with love bombing, and then they start to devalue you. And then you have the discarding, and then back to love bombing, devaluation, discarding. And it's just over and over and over again. You'll notice there's a lack of empathy. I think that's important to note, where you're like, it's very interesting just how unempathetic these people can be towards their partner. So being aware of that, if there's a lack of empathy, that's not something that, most people have. Most people have empathy. So if you're noticing a lack, then that's, kind of showing you in the future, this person's not going to be empathetic towards me, towards my feelings, towards the harm that's being caused. So just paying attention to those flags whenever it comes to that, but also paying attention to like abuse. Are they starting to become abusive? Because abuse in no area should ever be okay. That's not okay to do. And I'm not talking about, yes, raising your voice could technically be considered abuse. It's that kind of gray area, but that doesn't mean that person's an abuser. Now, if they are insulting you, if they are degrading you, if they are saying these horrible things, throwing your past up, saying things like, this is why you're, whatever they're saying, that's a huge flag. Because if this person is willing to intentionally cause harm on you, then they're willing to continue to do that. And that doesn't reflect towards someone that's willing to change. That's reflecting towards someone who's willing to cause harm.
And I really monsters who are tuned in, they don't encounter people like that, because that's going to leave a huge mark. That's going to be a huge trauma to have to heal from, I'm sure. And but for you to actually have the strength to pull yourself out of that situation, if you feel so connected and so tied to this narcissist too. So I hope that you monsters will figure it out and can figure it out in your own situations. Now, there's also this saying that goes, you'll meet the same person in different bodies until you learn the lesson. Is this something that you agree or disagree with?
Strongly agree with. Because we're habit creatures. That's why I kept meeting abusers in different forms. And I actually talk about that in my A-hole pandemic book, whenever I talk about my little section of like the different kinds of people that I ended up attracting, the narcissist, the abuser, and the con artist. Like, ooh, I picked some good ones, some lemons. But with that being said, whenever it comes to picking the same person in different forms, it's not, I don't want you to think about it like a lesson. I want you to think about it like it could be reenactment. You trying to heal inner child wounds. That's like your mom or your dad that you're literally reenacting in, current relationships. And that's what's happening. Or, and of course, therapy is great for that. Or it could be, that became your comfort. Maybe you were with an abuser for so long or a toxic person for so long that became what norm is, what love looks like for you. And now when you see that again, you end up getting into that like, oh, that's love. And it's not. I do want to also touch on something that you said earlier. And it reminded me of trauma bonds, getting away from a narcissist. It's never going to be easy. Getting away from an abuser, from a toxic relationship, from someone that's causing you harm, that's not easy to do because you end up trauma bonding. It feels like you're chained to this person. You're addicted to this person. You have these highs and lows. And when you get away, it's like, it is the most difficult thing in the world to do is to get away from an abuser. And people that haven't been in abusive relationships, they don't know how hard it is until you're in one and you realize how deeply you can love this person. And it's this crazy, like you're like a prisoner to them. You really are. So getting away from that, sometimes it's not, you have to separate. I know when I was leaving my abusive relationship, I still was in love with this person. Even though they had done all those horrible things to me, I was still in love with this person. And when I left, it felt like my soul was being ripped out of me. I was empty. I was hollow. I didn't want to leave. That was familiar. I'd been with this person for years. And I didn't think I would ever be loved again. And all of these different, fears came up in my mind. And I was just this hollow shell of a human being for years. It's worth it, though. To anyone who's listening, it is worth walking away because the healing and peace that comes after that is so beautiful. But it gets ugly for a little bit before it gets beautiful. But sometimes you have to base things not off of what you want and how you feel, but what your future self will thank you for and what you know you need. And if you know if you know that you need to leave this relationship, you might not want to leave this relationship. You might not feel ready to leave this relationship, but sometimes you got to do it even if you're not, even if you don't want it, even if you want to stay, and even if every ounce of your being is screaming, please no, you love them. Let's see if we can make this work. If they are proving over and over and over again that it's not going to, then sometimes you have to break your own heart by walking away.
Ooh, yeah. Oh my gosh. And I love that you mentioned that because we're about to get into the next question. But I love what you said. And if it's really, you just have to learn to walk away. And sometimes it does hurt. You have to hurt yourself in that process too, but it is much needed so that you can pull yourself away from something that's so unhealthy. So the next question actually is with regard to one of the hardest things that we have to face when someone hurts us or breaks our heart in a relationship or otherwise is learning to forgive them, especially when we never get closure or an apology from whoever hurt us. But how do we do that when it's easier to feel anger, frustration, resentment towards them because it just feels more justified that way?
Yeah. So when it comes to forgiveness, number one, when someone harms you, I want you to think of it like a cut, like an emotional cut. It is your responsibility to heal from it, but it is their fault the cut is there in the first place. It is their fault that you're hurting, but you still need to heal yourself. And when you are hanging on to that anger and pain, it's really important to remember that it's not justice. Hanging on to that anger, yeah, it's easier, but that's not justice. That's not fair to you because now you are holding on to the pain they caused you, which is eating away at your own life. It's eating away at your happiness. It's eating away at your well-being. It's eating away at your peace. So not only is the pain that you're feeling not fair to you, which is why it's important to work through healing, but it's also important to learn to forgive by releasing those feelings. So how do you do that? Well, first of all, don't gaslight yourself into telling yourself that you're not allowed to feel angry. Allow yourself to feel angry, but work through that anger. Don't just sit there and stare at the anger over and over and over again and be like, God, I'm so mad at this. You want to look at it and be like, I'm mad. That's a symptom. Why am I angry? I'm angry because this person hurt me. I'm angry because I feel wronged. I'm angry because I feel betrayed. Okay, so you're not actually angry. You feel wrong and betrayed and hurt. Okay, so now we have those emotions.
Yeah.
So what do you need? What do you need right now to feel better? What do you need? Do you need to journal? Do you need to see a therapist? Do you need to work on journaling? Do you need to meditate? Go take a walk, ground yourself, work through it with your partner? What do you need? And you figure out what your needs are, and you start taking those steps. And it's important to remember that when you first start healing, it's still going to hurt, just like a wound. It's still going to hurt for a while. Even when it's starting to heal, it's still going to hurt. It's still going to be uncomfortable. It's not until it actually like scabs over, scars over, that it no longer hurts and becomes a memory. But it's okay to hurt. Doesn't mean it's not healing.
Yeah.
But it is important to work through whatever you're feeling. And sometimes our partner betrays us so much that the only way we can heal is by walking away. Maybe it's temporary, maybe it's long term. But you have to figure that out for yourself. Do I need space and time? Do I need to walk away to heal from this? Can I work through this with my partner? If your partner is outright refusing to work through this with you, and you want to work through that with them, they're not going to suddenly change their mind. It's not going to happen. And if they do, then it's only being willing to, normally, not all cases, but normally that's just because you're walking away and they're like, wait. Now that it's making me hurt, now I'm willing to chase after you and be like, let's work through this. Well, where was that whenever you were hurting? Where was the willingness to work whenever you were going through it, whenever you were begging for them to work through this with you so that you can heal and move forward with the relationship? Why is it that they're only willing to put in the work when you are walking away and they are feeling pain?
Yeah.
That's a huge flag right there.
Mm-hmm.
That really is. Now, some people do have a realization when that happens, but normally what ends up happening is you come back and then you're like, okay, let's work through this. And they might be willing to work through this maybe a month, maybe 2 months. But if it's something like cheating, some huge betrayal, that's going to take usually longer than that. And if they're just in it for the temporary thing, once they have you back and are comfortable and feel safe, then they don't want to work through it anymore. Why aren't you healed yet? They'll say, God, how long is this going to take for you to just let this go, and that kind of stuff. And it does take time to heal, especially I want you to think of each wound being of a different depth. Some wounds are really, really deep, and those wounds take a hot minute to heal. They really do. And there's no set timeline. So if that person has it in their mind, you should be good in a week, and it's going to take you 4 months, and they start getting mad at you and making you feel guilty, well, that's a problem. Because it's not your fault that it's taking time for you to heal from the wound they caused you.
For sure. So, like, let's say that someone did cheat on you, manipulate you, or even disappeared on you when you needed them or when you were trying to work things out. What are some of the ways once you actually do walk away from them, or because they walked away first? What are some of the ways that we can stop ruminating on why the people who hurt us did what they did in the manner that they did?
If we get stuck on why, we'll be stuck on that forever, because sometimes there isn't a good reason. Sometimes they're just being douche faces. I mean, really. And the reality is sometimes people react or do something because of a past wound, because of fear. There could be a million different explanations. And if we think that learning why is going to heal a wound, that's like sticking a Band-Aid on a wound and hoping it stops the pain. It's not going to happen. You got to work on the actual wound. Why doesn't really matter. That they did it matters. They did it, and nothing, no explanation, no realization can take away from the fact that they did it. And then the worst thing that you can do is blame yourself for it. Yeah. They are responsible for their actions. If it was cheating, they are responsible for that. They chose to do that. Mm-hmm. They decided to take all of those actions that led up to cheating. It was a conscious decision. It didn't just happen. Cheating doesn't just you don't just accidentally fall on top of someone. That doesn't just happen. So with that being said, you are not responsible for their actions. You're responsible for your own healing.
There we go. And I'm sure, not to say that it is rampant, but I have been hearing, stories left and right of like people being cheated on. And sometimes it's just really like, I get triggered in a way because especially these are my friends. And so I get so triggered when someone tells me that they've been cheated on. And because it's like, like what you said, it's a conscious effort. Like it took time for them to actually build into that until it actually did happen. So
Yep.
it's like a rational thing that they did, or like they were willing to do it eventually. So it's just like, yeah, I'm always like the bulldog of my friends, because it's just unspeakable for them, for to hear my friends, get hurt in that sense. Now, some of us, of course, even like with all of the things that we have tried to work through in relationships, why though do some of us still choose to stay in relationships, whether they're toxic or no longer working, even when we know we really do deserve better?
Comfort, attachment, habits. You've been in it for so long. You've already dedicated so much time to it. You don't want to just give up. You're using your empathy as a weapon against you. And what I mean by that is you keep making excuses for their behavior. Oh, they lashed out at me. They were disrespectful. They did A, B, and C because of, EFG, and we try to explain and rationalize this toxic behavior in our mind to make it feel better for us. But just because you understand why they did it doesn't excuse that they did it. So when you end up staying in a relationship, maybe you're saying, well, I still love this person, but love isn't enough, because when love comes at the cost of your destruction, that is too expensive. That is way too expensive. And they don't want to feel the pain of heartbreak, or they don't want to hurt that person, or they don't want to feel guilty for walking away. But that person is choosing to be who they are. They are choosing not to work on themselves. They are making these active choices, and choices have consequences. And sometimes those consequences mean losing a good person. So in the end, it's about self-love. And self-love is not fluffy ice cream that you get on a Saturday night. Self-love, sometimes, I mean, it could look like that, but self-love means sometimes breaking your own heart. Sometimes saying, I love you. I don't want to give up on you, but I'm hurting so much because of the actions you're choosing to continue to do that I have no other choice but to walk away, because I have to love myself too. Self-love is not selfish. I hate that trend that is like, I'm going to be selfish. Why? You're not being selfish. Self-love is putting yourself equal to people, because you're so used to being stomped on and putting less than, that putting yourself equal to the others makes feel selfish. It absolutely feels selfish, because you're not used to being equal. You're not saying my needs are more than yours. You're saying my needs matter too. And sometimes when you say my needs matter too, that means because you're choosing to cause harm on me, I have to choose to walk away, even though I know it's going to hurt you. But you have been hurting me for so long that I have no other choice.
That's so powerful, and that actually spoke to me, because I have been, for a time, maybe I still am, I'm not really sure, like I have been that person who's like, I would minimize my needs to accommodate the other person. Be like, oh, okay, I'm upsetting you, okay, let's just not fight about this anymore, and nothing's resolved, and I'm still miserable, but I still want them in my life. Like it's something, I know I'm not the only one who feels like this, Monsters. I'm sure some of you have that habit too. But self-love, if it feels selfish, like what Angelika said, then so be it, so that we can get used to feeling more equal, and to validating ourselves more, and our value and our self-worth. So we are nearing the end of the show, but oh my gosh, so many truth bombs dropped this evening by Angelika Koch. She is just so amazing what she does, and everything that she has shared so far, I'm sure, has helped somebody who has been listening or watching on YouTube, on Facebook, or on Twitch. Now, in trying to help fix a relationship, or try to detox, if you will, a toxic relationship, there's going to be conflict that you'll have to encounter. And that's inevitable in any connection that you have with a friend, a family member, a partner. So how do we initiate difficult conversations, and what's the proper mindset to have when we go through it?
So it's really important to see if that person's in a good place at the time, whenever you're expressing your feelings. So, hi, are you in a place to be able to have a conversation about something that's really bothering me? So see if they're in a place. If they had a really hard day, maybe someone in their family died, or maybe they just had a bad day at work, that's probably not the time to have these deep conversations with that person, because they're not even going to be in the mind space or head space to be able to dive into themselves and self-reflect. But if they're in a good place and they're like, okay, what's going on? That's when you sit down and you say, I feel this way. Like you concentrate on how things have affected you and a solution. So I want you to think of it like one thing that you can do is what I call the sandwich. So you validate the person and their side. So that way their guard is lowered and they understand and they feel seen. Then the meat of the sandwich or the vegetables, if you're vegan or whatever, then that is your point. So you're like, I understand that A, B, and C, it's been affecting you A, B, and C. However, I feel this way whenever this thing happens, and it's really been affecting me and bothering me. Provide a solution to the problem. You want to already have thought about a solution and how you can move forward in a productive way. And then the bottom is revalidating. But I do understand A, B, and C, and that way they're still feeling seen and heard. You have the validation sandwich, but then still problem and solution in the center.
Gotcha. Well, hopefully those who are listening remember that sandwich. Remember the sandwich when they are planning to have a difficult conversation with their partner, whoever it is that they need to have a difficult conversation with. Now, finally, what is the best advice that you can give or that you have been given when it comes to going into relationships, into, investing your life and time with someone, in the hopes of it not really being forever, but at least being long term?
Yeah. I want you to ask yourself, what is my future self going to say to me if I stay in this? Are they going to thank you? Is your future self going to be like, oh my God, thank you for sticking it out with this person. They're such a good human being. They're so healthy and good for you. Or is your future self going to say, why did you give this toxic person chance after chance and now look at me? So make the decision based on what your future self is going to say to you.
That's actually pretty cool. Never really thought about it that way, but because it used to be like, think of something that your 5-year-old self would be proud of. But I guess, yeah, it's really working towards the future, just really thinking about what the future self would say if you were to stick this out with this person. So very helpful and so inspiring and just so much learned, so much insight this evening. Angelika, thank you so much for taking the time to grace the show with your presence and your knowledge and your wisdom. Now, any final messages, like plug in your social media and also the book, The Able Pandemic. Yes, let's say it again. so that people can go ahead and read and work on themselves, since it is a workbook after all. Go ahead.
So I do have longer YouTube videos that I have under Nerdy Traveling Writer. I'm actually going to be releasing a podcast soon under Nerdy Traveling Writer. I already did the first episode, so I just have to get on that and put it out there on Thanksgiving and how to deal with toxic family members on Thanksgiving. I've got TikTok under Nerdy Traveling Writer, Instagram under Nerdy Traveling Writer. It's all pretty much the same consistent name, just so you can find me everywhere. But yeah, really the best advice I can give is show yourself the same empathy that you show others, because a lot of times we end up showing others more empathy than we show ourselves.
That's right. And I can totally hear you. It's just that Madonna is speaking on my behalf because
I love this for you. Madonna's iconic.
Exactly. So yeah, okay. Let me try and fix the cam back. Yeah, there we go. Okay.
Welcome back.
Oh, and just like that, I guess in HOT fashion, it had to end in a technical difficulty, I guess. But thank you so much, Angelika, for joining the show this evening and for just telling us, more about toxic relationships and how we can be better partners, better people, better family members, better friends, so that we don't have to carry this burden and feel like we can't fix ourselves or we can't heal from the wounds that we have. So thank you so much. And for all the monsters who are tuned in, I hope you learned a lesson or two also. But yeah, for now, happy Thanksgiving before Merry Christmas, by the way. Happy Thanksgiving to you. And I hope you have an awesome evening. For all the monsters, I'll catch you again next Thursday. I will have another guest for sure. But for now, keep it locked only here on the